And you should all get that. And Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, just to reiterate, we will be aiming to publish all these talks as we normally do for conferences, even though this is a virtual conference this year. Welcome everybody, particularly to those of you joining from outside the UK, the US. I see Gabriella there from Sweden, so it's great to have an international audience for this Zoom session. And delighted to welcome June Laurenson to give the talk today. Some of you may remember June from the Merton College conference in September 2018, who gave a paper on the visual arts as a metaphor for the country houses in AP's work. And today, as Keith's mentioned, June will be talking about the Ufford Hotel. June's been helping us with our social media on the Society, so thanks to June for that. She's doing a PhD at Edinburgh University and will be talking to us from Edinburgh. So June, I'll hand over to you and ask you to screen share and take us through your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming, for being here today. And thank you to Keith and Paul for giving me the opportunity to present my paper or some of my research to all of you, such a global audience. It's quite a thing. And I hope you find my talk interesting. It's very different in nature to the amazing talks that we've had so far this session, but I hope it shows to you just how wonderful and detailed a writer Anthony Powell actually was. Something that's really hit me when I've been writing this for my thesis. So before we kick off, I'll say a bit first, and then I'll put on my slideshow for all of you. In fact, I'll put it on now if I can. This is when you hope it works. So let me share my screen. Where are you? Share screen. Where's that? Where do I share my screen, Paul?
Bottom green tab.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Yes, there you go. Right, there we are. That's the one, and I'll put my screen on. There we go, and I'll put it on presentation. So
yeah, that's working, June. Thanks.
Great, no problem. So this is me here at the bottom. So the Ufford is the first hotel to which the reader is introduced in the series A Dance, the Music of Time. It appears in the third volume of the series called The Acceptance World, which is set between the years of 1931 and 1933. Paul actually wrote the book in 1955, so it's 20 years in retrospect from when he wrote it. Of the 5 hotels mentioned in Dance, it's the establishment in which Nick Jenkins has the most description, is described most in most detail by him, through either visits to see his Uncle Giles or during the Second World War when he comes back on war business. Through the small details of the inward and outward appearance of the Ufford, there's evidence that Powell not only uses it as a setting for things to happen in, but he also uses its links with transience and in-betweenness and its identity to use as a medium through which he can talk about uncertainties during the war years, when Britain itself was in a very in-between location between the Great War and the Second World War. Okay, so this is a little overview of what we're going to be talking about in this talk. It is very whistle-stop. There's not everything included that I would like to say because it is such a huge subject, but this is just a little outline of what we'll do. So we're going to kick off with a little run through of actual Bayswater demographics. This is the area of London that this fictional hotel is based in, to give you a flavour of the kind of residents that were in Bayswater at the time when Powell set at the Acceptance World. Then we'll look at the actual specific, or guessing specific location of the Ufford Hotel, as is written in the book, rather than where we think it is. Then we'll look at the associations with wealth and change with the Ufford, and how that may have made that influence our argument about being transition in between. And then this word liminality, it's kind of a buzzword in English lit. We'll talk about that in more detail later, but we're going to look at the different ways in which the Ufford acts as a kind of in-between with many things, not only society, but the hotel itself. Then we'll look at the external appearance, intermingled with Uncle Giles, and then the internal furnishing. Uncle Giles pops up in different bits in the last three headings. So you'll just bear with me with that one. And then finally, we'll finish off with the Second World War appearance of the Ufford when it becomes the headquarters of a branch of the Polish Secret Service. Okay, so buckle up, hold on tight, because it's going to be quite a whistle-stop tour through it. Okay, so first up, we're going to look at Bayswater demographics, 1890s to 1940s. So according to Baker et al. In their text called Paddington Bayswater, this area of London became a great and artistic town, growing in size and population at a faster rate than within the London suburbs, other London suburbs in the mid to late 19th century. It was mainly inhabited by artists, literary figures, wealthy merchants, statesmen, and financiers, and the area became more cosmopolitan and commercialized towards the end of the 19th century. During this time, the renowned department store, Whiteley's, acquired premises on Queen's Road, which alone necessitated the need for hotels and boarding houses for staff to live in when they worked there. On top of this, the high demand for railway travel, which kicked in after industrialisation, meant a further increase in the building of hotels in the district following the opening of the Queen's Road Underground in 1901. So the area's association with wealth continued into the interwar period, when many of the private residences were converted into flats or hotels, many of these being inhabited by distinguished residents. It is during this time when Paul Jenkins visits his uncle Giles at the Ufford and introduces it to the readers. So the location of the Ufford itself, well, it's very vague. All we know is that it lies in a region west of Queen's Road. From the descriptions of the locality, the Ufford would most likely have been one of a number of small hotels that emerged as a result of the 19th century transportation boom, offering those of financial means a more comfortable home away from home. Indeed, this sense of exclusivity is enhanced through the fact that the Ufford is a private hotel situated in a region west of Queen's Road. So here we have a picture from the album to our Dance to the Music of Time, which is a painting by Noel Spencer of the Princess Square neighbourhood, which lies to the west of Queen's Road, as it used to be called. I think nowadays it's called Queen's Way, I believe. So the landscape here, you've got an angular street containing tall, rather grand terrace buildings, featuring stucco designs, balconies, and elaborate window structures. Baker et al. State that towards the turn of the 20th century, Princess Square was considered as being one of the wealthier areas in Bayswater, a factor that again indicates the demographic of the Ufford's former clientele. So looking at this wealth, this is a very wealthy area, and if you've read Dance and you've read the Ufford, you know that it doesn't really scream wealth, does it? We can maybe deduce, Paul has not said this, but we could maybe deduce that perhaps in its previous life that the Ufford was a desirable location. If you can remember, it is based in a latent and almost impenetrable area of London. The area not only evokes an aura of secrecy and concealment, hidden to all but those that know about it through its impenetrability, but it also gives it a sense of inscrutability and inaccessibility. The area appears almost fortress-like. This implies the Ufford and its environs had historically only been frequented by those who knew about it, maybe within small circles. This researcher, Bettina Matthias, states that until the new middle classes were afforded more leisure as a result of industrialisation, only the aristocracy and wealthier members of the traditional middle classes had the time and financial means to travel and frequent hotels. When the situation changed in the interwar years, allowing the newly rich and middle classes to enter geographical areas only previously accessible to the aristocracy, Matthias argues that the upper classes sought less accessible areas in order to safeguard the exclusivity of their circle. Thus, the impenetrable, concealed location of the Ufford point to this having been one such high society hotel in its past, in the years preceding the Great War, although its status as such at the time of Jenkins' narrative in 1931 is shown to be very different. Within this rapidly developing and dynamic part of Bayswater, the Ufford appears otherworldly and obscure, as it stands isolated and detached from the bustle of everyday life. Indeed, playing on the liquidity of the area's name, Jenkins describes streets outside the establishment as being sluggish Bayswater tides. These are not the busy streets associated with increased commercialism and urbanisation seen elsewhere in Bayswater. Rather, they're characterised by a sense of indolence, languidness, and lack of progression. A further connection between this hotel and wealth can be observed in Pole's choice of name for the establishment. Through its resemblance to the word afford, there's the implication that the Ufford was the sort of establishment that could only be accessed if an individual had the financial means or social status to do so. Whether Pole intended this association or not, its appropriateness cannot be denied, especially as Pole, through the narrative of Jenkins, goes into fine detail describing the geographical, external and internal aspects of the hotel and its connotations with former wealth. As I will go and talk about, the affordability of the Ufford appears to have changed as time progressed, from the Victorian and Edwardian eras to those in the wake of the Great War, allowing more people to cross the class threshold as a result of radical social change.
Can I keep these photos but give away the frames? Sure.
This can be evidenced by Jenkins' uncle Giles, who grudgingly admitted that the Ufford had been going downhill from days when he'd first known the establishment, serving him well in the interwar years as a convenient base for his aimless and uncomfortable life. So this word liminality, it's a term coined by Arnold van Gennep in 1960, 5 years after The Acceptance World was written, but a concept that is very, very obvious in The Kindly Ones, the sixth book in the series of Dance. Van Gennep separates this liminality, this whole process as segregation, separation, liminality, and reaggregation. And I've written them on the screen there. The main one we're going to look at today is the middle one, and the word middle being quite appropriate. It's the middle state, it's ambiguous, and it happens when you're between and betwixt all points of classification. So hotels themselves are liminal spaces because they lie outside everyday space and time. They're not home, they're permanent, they're temporary, okay? They lie between a set, betwixt and between two set points. This can also be seen in the geography of the Ufford, in that it occupies two corner houses. The hotel doesn't belong to one street nor another. Further examples of betweenness can be found in the external and internal features of the Ufford, as well as its most frequent guest, Uncle Giles himself. He's not just reflective of liminality as a space, but also as a state of mind and a way of life. Furthermore, the premises had formerly been two houses, not only reflects the trend during the interwar years for homes to be converted into flats and hotels as the area became more commercialised, but also symbolises the changes in society brought about by the increase in tourism at this time. The conversion of homes associated with rootedness and permanence into a hotel, which is associated with rootlessness and temporality, symbolises what Matthias believes was a feeling of homelessness and transition, which was characteristic in the wake of the Great War, where many people still clung to old traditions and were fearful of the future. At this time, when we're talking about Nick Jenkins visiting Uncle Giles, there was a lot of fear in society, not only brought on by the aftermath of the Great War, but also by the advent of the national government, which was being formed at the very time that Nick would have been visiting Uncle Giles. This would put into society a big fear that maybe past traditions were at risk of being completely overtaken by more modern fads, and people were a little bit nervous about that. These changes from past to present were exacerbated further due to the increasing likelihood of a Second World War, leaving British society in a kind of no man's land, unsure of its past and unknowing of what its future holds. In fact, in his book, The 30s and After, Stephen Spender describes the mysterious and unimaginable reality that the threat of another war brought about, writing, "We anticipated the worst destruction then imaginable. In our minds, the Second World War would mean the end of all civilization." So it gives you an idea of the feelings that were going about in society at the time. So the external appearance of the Ufford. Okay, this link with war and change can be seen in the architecture of the angular and top-heavy block in which the Ufford is situated, and also in the design of the hotel itself. The topological appearance of the neighbourhood not only imbues it with a sense of the unusual, but it also gives it the suggestion of instability. At any time, the upper stories of the buildings have the potential of toppling over. Within this block, Jenkins perceives the structure of the Ufford as being akin to a large vessel moored and anchored in the street. In choosing to structure the design of the hotel on a boat, Powell not only associates it with one of the more traditional forms of transport for economy or leisure, but also links it with war, past and imminent. The metaphorical tides upon which the Ufford appears are the Bayswater streets, with their tidal ebb and flow, albeit sluggishly in the vicinity of the Ufford, provided by society as it tries to ascertain its identity in this liminal period. In their book, Liminal Landscapes, Hazel Andrews and Les Roberts write that the sea is not only a natural barrier, but it's also a potential threat to show that landscapes are under a process of constant change. So this vessel-like hotel, anchored in the tidal streets of the upmarket area of London, evokes the sense of temporariness. Although the Ufford has occupied this location for many years, it has the potential of metaphorically casting off and moving on, depending on the tidal changes of society. Within this context, the vessel-like Ufford Hotel occupies the space between the end of one time and the beginning of another, mirroring the period of change and uncertainty, not only in Britain, but in Europe as well. In the same way in which Jenkins links the vessel-like structure of the hotel with war, he describes the hotel as being of a battleship grey colour, its facade implying a melancholic griminess and a sense of decay over time. This then hints at the change in status of the Ufford. This is no longer a hotel whose guests value high standards, rather it evokes a sense of seediness and murk. Furthermore, the colour grey represents the liminality symbolised by the institution of the hotel. Just as the hotel acts as a transitory betwixt and between space for holidaymakers, which is out of time and out of place, the colour grey occupies the middle ground between the poles of black and white, light and dark, and more symbolically, life and death, both aspects which the Ufford contains. It's a colour associated with obscurity and the unknown. As I will shortly discuss, the transience and otherworldliness symbolised by the description of the geographical and external features of the Ufford are developed further in relation to the hotel's interior decor, defining not only the sense of anachronism evident within the interwar hotel, but the otherworldliness of the guests who frequent it. So now we'll go on to the inside of the hotel. So in moving inside the hotel, Jenkins comments that, like the exterior structure, the interior of the ground floor of the 1930s Ufford conveyed some reminder of life at sea, though certainly no luxuriously equipped liner, perhaps decorated years before as a rich man's yacht. The now dated signs of glamour, wealth, and comfort evidenced in the upholstery, furnishings, and ornamentation in the Ufford's ground floor reception areas bespeak of indulgences formerly sought after by wealthy individuals who stayed in their palaces for the rich to signal to the world ones belonging to distinguished high society. The Ufford in its former days calls to mind similar fictional hotels of the Edwardian era, such as Arnold Bennett's Grand Babylon Hotel, which, although a larger establishment than the Ufford, possessed a lavish interior and an air of profound importance that contributed to the hotel's characteristic atmosphere of serenity and repose. However, from Jenkins' description of the rest of the Ufford's interior, it becomes evident that the hotel's glory days have well and truly passed. The sense of griminess and depression evoked by the external grey and oppressive aspect of the hotel continues into the heart of the building itself. According to Jenkins, one of the factors contributing to the Ufford's decline is that it has been reduced to ignoble uses like traffic in tourists, pilgrims, or even illegal immigrants. In contrast to its impenetrable location, which would formerly have made entry impossible for all but those in the know who existed, now the interwar Ufford caters for a much more diverse group of guests from different social classes. This social overhaul then had an impact on the Ufford. The exclusivity cherished by its wealthier clientele in the past was no longer available to them. The social threshold between the well-to-do and lower classes was more permeable, allowing wider society to experience a lifestyle that had formerly been out of their reach. Jenkins' description of the Ufford's business as being of ignoble use associates it as being of a base or crude nature, temporarily housing individuals who find themselves in a period of rootlessness, whether that be on holiday or on a journey or in search of a new lifestyle. This baseness accords with an argument by Morgan, a person called Morgan, who states that tourists may also subvert social norms, challenge convention, and seek adventures in liminal travel spaces, such as hotels, because of the increased movement and anonymity offered by such places, almost giving permission for hotels to be for illicit activity to happen in hotels. It therefore seems appropriate that the character most associated with the Ufford is Jenkins' liminal and melancholic Uncle Giles, a disgraced army veteran whose unreliable and shady business dealings, debts, and complex personal life have exiled him from his family and have resulted in him leading a nomadic life, wandering from hotel to hotel. So the in-betweenness of Uncle Giles' social situation is evident from the reader's first introduction to him during Jenkins' school days, back in A Question of Upbringing at the very start of the book. On visiting Jenkins at school, Uncle Giles appears on the threshold between Jenkins' dormitory and the hallway, neither one place nor the other in the narrow space between the door and the wall. He thus occupies a no man's land, a space between places, and a sense of transience which reflects his apparent philosophy of reaching his destination without knowing the name of the goal. This initial portrayal sets the reader up for Uncle Giles' random appearances within different liminal settings throughout the dance series, as he tries to settle business, financial, and personal affairs. It's also interesting to note, as a by the by, that Uncle Giles dines every evening at the Trouville restaurant, the name, which shares the same stem as the French verb trouver, which means to find, appears to reflect his ongoing attempts to find the destination and the goal that he's seeking in life. Despite his occasional stays within other hotels, it was home to the Ufford that Uncle Giles invariably returned, having left his belongings there sometimes for months on end. According to Jenkins, the depressing aspect of the Ufford is caused by Uncle Giles himself. Character and hotel have almost become one entity, where the description of one mirrors the other. Old-fashioned, anonymous, cold and sparse, maintaining an air of general disapproval of the way the world was run. Socially, Jenkins describes his uncle of being of the middle sort, again, a betwixt and between name for him, a group that did maybe not have access to places such as the Ufford in the years before the Great War. Indeed, Uncle Giles' views are known to be unconquerably opposed to all established institutions, on the grounds that they were entirely, and therefore incapably, administered by persons whose sole aim was that they could command influence. In line with the increasing accessibility of establishments previously only enjoyed by a select few, Uncle Giles' occupation of the Ufford evokes a sense of defiance against the old order. In crossing a social boundary, he has the ability to enjoy hospitality that previously could only be purchased at a high financial cost, even if now it has become outdated and tarnished in appearance and reputation. So aside from symbolising a crossing of social barriers, Uncle Giles' presence in the Ufford also exemplifies the transience, nebulous and seditious activity often associated with the establishment of the hotel. Frequently on the lookout for ways in which he can extort extra cash from a trust fund divided equally between himself and Jenkins' father, Uncle Giles' activities are obscure and dubious in nature, mirroring the grey fog into which he initially disappeared from public view. His activities provide Jenkins' family with a sense of perpetual foreboding and curiosity, thereby characterising this wayward and elusive relative as being one who considers it necessary to fade in and out of obscurity, avoiding the consequences of the subversive activities he's been engaged in. For him, the liminal space provided by the Ufford and by hotels in general equate to safety. The anonymity and concealment offered by them assign it as an ideal temporary home that not only furnishes his immediate needs, but also exemplifies the ignoble use into which the Ufford has fallen. Go back, Louis. Yeah, there we go. Jenkins also uses the word traffic in relation to the guests who frequented the Ufford during the interwar years, maintaining the links that the hotel has with travel. However, the word, coupled with Jenkins' perception that the hotel had an air of secret, melancholy guilt, both add to the sense of ignobility that's associated with the interwar Ufford. Traffic implies a sense of commercialization and bourgeois and homogeneous depersonalization of the hotel and its guests. It's not a term that would be considered appropriate for groups of wealthier and more noble guests of the Victorian and Edwardian eras. Additionally, the word traffic could be linked to subversive social morals, compounding the seedy undertone commensurate with the Ufford's tarnished decorations. Whereas at one time the Ufford may have been a high-quality getaway for those of financial means, it appears in 1931 as a gloomy, seedy and anachronistic relic within its Bayswater neighbourhood, affordable to everyone. So then we talk about some more of the rooms. The sense of gloom and anachronism that envelops the Ufford Hotel is evidenced in Jenkins' description of its interior, which he says is bare, anonymous, old-fashioned, draughty, with heavy mahogany cabinets and sideboards spaced out at intervals in passages and landings. The Ufford appears to be characterised with a sense of absence. From Jenkins' description, there is no evidence of comfort nor light, and there's even an absence of human life. Jenkins remarks that on most of his visits to the hotel, the place is utterly deserted. According to Bates, this absence and gloom is also seen in the interwar novels of J.B. Priestley and Anthony Powell's friend Elizabeth Bowen. Similarly to Powell's Ufford, Bowen's hotels were crippled by the meanness of all things that are missing. No running water, no paper on the walls, no beauty, no light, no civility. Bowen claims that this is the consequence of opportunistic greed feeding on the interwar glut of tourism, providing guests with a wretched form of hospitality. In relation to the Ufford, it appears that this tarnished hotel, once decorated as a rich man's yacht, and whose structure bore some resemblance to a large vessel, now appears like an abandoned ship awaiting a new identity. The only room to which the reader has access via Jenkins' description is what he calls the lounge. This is situated within a larger drawing room, which has been divided in two, separated from the street-facing writing room by two doors that were permanently closed. Now, there's more I could say about these doors, but I don't have time. You'll have to read about that in my thesis another time. According to Emma Short, while the aim of hotels is to replicate the standard of comfort of the domestic sphere, where rooms would have been separated for gendered activities, the demarcation of public rooms within hotels, coupled with their corresponding lack of privacy, lends these spaces an inescapable air of inauthenticity, can't say that word. As I will demonstrate, the sense of artificiality is evident throughout the interior of the interwar Ufford Hotel. The division created by the permanently shut doors during the Great War, the interwar period, further portrays its anachronism, stagnation, and lack of progression within this time of rapid social change. Within the interwar Ufford, the aspect of the lounge is therefore towards the rear of the property. Indeed, Jenkins relates that the lace curtain window looks out onto wall, thus providing a bleak outlook, casting with gloom of perpetual night or of a sky forever dark with rain. The bleak outlook offered by the room within the Ufford, that would traditionally be the hub of social interaction, emphasises this sense of uncertainty of what the future might hold. Pritchard and Morgan write that not only are liminal spaces borderlands between the mundane and extraordinary, but they are also places of anxiety, replete with darker images of threat and danger. Indeed, the melancholic atmosphere within the interior of the hotel in general is described as Jenkins as being pervaded with uneasy memories of the strife of men. The anxieties of the past, coupled with those of the future, place the Ufford again in this middle no man's land, in a present where it is effectively stagnating within its previous identity. Even the clock in the lounge reflects a sense of uncertainty and liminality. It has stopped working. Its hands stuck eternally at 20 minutes past 5, a time of day that belongs to neither afternoon nor evening. You can probably think of many stop clocks in literature, let alone Miss Havisham's in Dickens, Emily Dickinson's poem, The Clock Stopped, and also Arnold Bennett's short story, Why the Clock Stopped, all signify a death of one form of life and the potential beginning of a new one. So while the streets outside convey a sluggish, laborious movement, the stop clock within the Ufford resonates strongly with the sense of a death of a way of life, as previously discussed. Its lack of movement mirrors the static atmosphere within the hotel, where life seems to be frozen in time, awaiting something to set the pendulum in action again, if indeed it ever does. While most of the furnishings and ornamentation in the lounge appear dated by the time Jenkins describes it in the late autumn of 1931, amid the Art Deco era, there are signs of former luxuries. There is a palm in a brass pot with ornamental handles in the corner of the lounge, and a scattering of Moorish tables, their presence contributing to a sense of exoticism and foreignness. Upon one of these tables, a file of the Lady magazine, a society journal born in the Victorian era, whose wealthier, genteel female readership is reflected through its advertisements for domestic service and high-quality articles. However, on the other tables sat heavy white globular ashtrays, their crude appearance and practicality contrasting starkly with the beauty and intricacy of the Moorish table's construction and design. These items of furniture are no longer displayed for the admiration of guests or as signs of wealth, but rather exist purely for practical purposes. Another form of luxury that Jenkins describes are the wall coverings, which appear to match the pattern on the chintz sofa and armchairs. Being of an intricate floral design in blue, grey and green, it ran upwards from a cream-covered Lincrusta dado to a cornice also of cream Lincrusta. Here again, in drawing attention to the detail of the brand of wall covering, Powell, through his narrator, hints at the high quality associated with the Ufford in years leading up to the Great War. In an article which focuses on the history of this form of embossed wall covering, Pamela Stevenson states that in the rapidly changing years following the Industrial Revolution, Lincrusta promised stability for the future through the idea that technology could provide enduring, permanent building material. Stating that the heyday of the Lincrusta decoration lay in the period between 1880 and the 1930s, when it was used in upper middle class dwellings, lodges, pubs, taverns and yachts, Simpson describes the appeal of Lincrusta as primarily being due to its artisan design, practicability and durability. Its waterproof properties make it a popular choice for use on ships. Indeed, it adorned the walls of the Titanic, while its durability reflected a permanence and indestructibility which withstood heavy bombing during the Second World War. So here, it can be seen that in including the details of the encrusted dado and cornicing in the ship-like Ufford Hotel, for which it appears an appropriate wall covering, Powell's Ufford not only reflects the trends and tastes of its former wealthy clients, but it also gives the hotel a sense of permanence and hope. In fact, when Jenkins unexpectedly returns to a changed Ufford 11 years later, when the Second World War is in progress, he notes that the faded floral wallpaper remains, enclosed above and below by broad parchment-like embossed surfaces. Despite society moving on and undergoing more instability through another war, tradition is very much still in evidence, riding the storm of the turbulent tides, but it has become clearly faded. The only other item of note in the Ufford's lounge are the circular gilt mirrors and the solitary piece of artwork that hangs on its walls, the latter being an 1834, I've got 1837 there, engraving by Sir Edwin Landseer entitled Bolton Abbey in the Olden Times. As Jenkins ironically contrasts the crowded scene of medieval plenty portrayed within the painting with the more mediocre cuisine offered by the Ufford, there is again the suggestion of olden times at the hotel. Perhaps at one time the Ufford offered a similar form of communion and culinary abundance, now starkly lacking and made more evident by the presence of the painting. But there are deeper parallels between this painting and the Ufford than this obvious contrast made by Jenkins. According to James A. Manson in his 1902 text on Landseer, this fine artwork was considered to be Landseer's most popular painting and was one of those pictures which no gentleman's family should be without. In addition, Queen Victoria and her consort made etchings of Landseer's designs, especially from parts of Bolton Abbey. So in the early years of its existence, the painting was highly sought after by the upper classes of society. The presence of this reproduction of this popular and appealing artwork in the Ufford then hints at the hotel's past social standing in its olden times. Its clientele would be educated to the extent that they would appreciate the painting while enjoying the equivalent luxuries that the hotel had had at its disposal. However, as Stevens points out, over time, the interpretation of Bolton Abbey has become problematic and it has come under much criticism. Its composition was not only found to be lacking in imagination, but the figures within it appear unnatural, artificially posing in an unspontaneous manner. Moreover, Stevens considers the painting as possessing the air of a collection of portraits of modern folks, and so it belies its title. In the same way in which Stevens considers the imposition of modern folks into the noticeably older setting of the painting's backdrop as a defect, the more modern guests of the anachronistic Ufford contribute to its tarnished, artificial and unnatural atmosphere in the interwar years. Landseer's painting then metaphorically reflects the incongruous state of the Ufford in the same way in which the occasional gilt-framed mirrors that share the lounge wall space actually reflect the incongruity of the anachronistic setting of the hotel and the modern folks that frequent it. These reflected images in turn become individually unique Ufford versions of the Landseer painting, each as unnatural as the original. So finally, the Ufford as headquarters. Jenkins returns to the Ufford in 1942 during service in World War II, 11 years after this meeting with Uncle Giles. At this point in time, the hotel has been requisitioned for use as a headquarters for the branch of the Polish Secret Service, but it still maintains the same association with liminality, secrecy and trafficking observed in its past role as a hotel. Jenkins is asked by one of his supervisors to collect the report, I'm not even going to say that word, that report from the Polish secret headquarters, a betwixt and between document that is defined by Jenkins as being one of those items of intelligence that fell in a no man's land between normal official channels and the Secret Service, and which was trafficked in exchange for information that the operational and country sections liked to see. Here, the secrecy of the traffic goods is beneficial to the nation's security, rather than being ignoble as it had been in the Ufford. The building's concealed and impenetrable location, once enjoyed and frequented by wealthy, will later serve as an appropriate elusive site for the secrets of war to be exchanged. On his return, on Jenkins' return to the Ufford, the landscape has dramatically changed, with many buildings in the neighbourhood having succumbed to bombs or abandonment, meaning Jenkins does not recognise the former Ufford when he first arrives. Just as he likened his appearance to the battleship in the interwar years, the shell of the Ufford Hotel has so far weathered the storms of bombings and remains intact, at least until the first half of the Second World War. Furthermore, the Bayswater streets, described as sluggish tides in the interwar years, now hold refugees from Gibraltar, whose vibrant and colourful clothing add a sense of Mediterranean exoticness to the area, in much the same way that the Moorish furnishings formerly provided in the Ufford's drab lounge. On this occasion, on arriving at a large grey house with a sub-Palladian porch, Jenkins notes the emanacious atmosphere that he correlates with buildings hurriedly converted to official use, whether or not they were enclaves or more or less secret nature. On realising that this is the former Ufford to which he has returned, it can be seen that the depressing and melancholic air still remains. Despite its new role, the building maintains the disquieting and gloomy atmosphere manifested in human form by its former resident, Uncle Giles. While the interwar Ufford Hotel appears out of place in 1930s Bayswater through its dated interior furnishings, the building continues to have an air of not belonging a decade later due to the temporary nature of its internal decor. Within the former lounge of the hotel, elements of its past traditional identity remain, namely the Lancrusta dado rail and cornicing with the faded flower wallpaper. Just as was mentioned earlier, it has survived bombing. It has lived up to its name. Not realising that he's within the former Ufford at this point, the wall covering recalls to Jenkins' mind a double drawing room of some old-fashioned family who had not redecorated their home for decades. The absence of redecoration not only reflects the speed at which the building was requisitioned for war use, but also the temporary nature of this occupation. Once the war is over, the building will no longer be required for its current purposes. Just as the hotel was a place of in-betweenness between 2 points for its transient guests, the requisitioned Ufford maintains its sense of liminality in sharing this temporariness of location. Its current role takes the form of a stopgap within its wider identity. In this way, the former Ufford mirrors Uncle Giles' transient lifestyle, where he sought to reach his destination without knowing the name of the goal. While the wall coverings remain the same within the former lounge, the other furnishings associated with the Ufford in Uncle Giles' time have been replaced. The Moorish tables, once items of admiration, have been replaced by functional trestles. And the place of the stop clock stand photographs of war leaders Winston Churchill and General Sikorsky. Here we can see that the removal of the stop clock has effectively set into motion a new identity of the Ufford Hotel. In sparing it from death by bomb damage or destruction, which would have been a fitting end to the anachronistic relic of the hotel and the lifestyle it symbolised, Powell assigns the building with a new identity, allowing it to survive and move on from its historical associations, while still retaining some of the vestiges of tradition. Additionally, the Landseer engraving picture has been replaced with posters of Slavonic design, advertising a Polish art and craft exhibition. When contrasted with the longevity accorded to the Landseer painting, or indeed even the clock under its glass dome, both the photographs and posters suggest temporality. Apart from the fact the Prime Minister is in office for a limited time, in fact, General Sikorsky was killed the year after this fictional visit of Jenkins to the old Ufford building. It is therefore likely the photographs would have been renewed towards the end of the Second World War, with more up-to-date political and military figures. Time in the Ufford as headquarters is effectively measured by political era rather than hours and minutes. Furthermore, the advertising posters would most likely be frequently replaced as the dates of exhibitions passed and a new event was scheduled. In stark contrast to the interior of the Ufford Hotel of the 1930s, whose furnishings and artwork had remained in situ from even the Victorian age, we can guess, that within the Ufford as headquarters is temporary and transient. Last slide, you'll be glad to know. Jenkins does not visit the Ufford again in its final iteration within the dance series. On being vacated by the secret branch of the Polish army, the building once again recommenced its dealings in subversive and obscure hospitality at an even more seedy level than in Uncle Giles' day. Jenkins comments that the 1930s hotel of Uncle Giles Ken would have, quote, struck too luxurious, too bourgeois a note in comparison to what it became after the Second World War. Noting that in following many of the hotels in Bayswater and Notting Hill in the mid-1940s, the Ufford had come down in the world, Jenkins paints the picture of the last viewing of the Ufford as being a cheap location sought after by adulterous couples who had their laundry impounded from time to time until satisfactory settlement of the weekly account. So in this talk, you'll be glad to know what's been done. I've shown that the Ufford's association with liminality are not solely limited to its role of hotel. Its geographical situation between two streets and its initial appearance in the dance series in the years between the two wars provide the establishment with an atmosphere of uncertainty regarding its current and future identity. I've discussed the ways in which radical social reforms that arose from the consequences of the Great War, particularly those related to class structures, allowed for the crossing of previously exclusive and impenetrable thresholds by wider society. Paul's Ufford is more than a setting. It is a symbol, a commentary, a mirror for British society and changes during the 20th century. There are many more aspects of the Ufford I've not had time to talk about, including its links with the spiritual world and the Ufford clone that is the Bellevue. For that, you'll need to read my thesis. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed.
Great, thank you very much, June. I certainly found that interesting. Okay, would you maybe like to clear your screen share?
Yep, of course I will, yeah.
Then I will get everybody back on the screen. Okay, questions for June? Comments? Good. Remind you, use the raise your hand in reactions if you want to. Okay, Michael Henley is first up. You're on mute, Michael.
I've enjoyed the talk immensely, and I just have a fundamental question.
Yes.
Where I've tried to locate the Ufford several times on a map. There is no Queen's Road in that area anymore.
No.
Here's a simple question. How far is it from Paddington?
Not far is the answer. There is no Queen's Road. It is now called Queen's Way. I can't remember when it was renamed, but I suspect Noreen's going to tell us, having lived there. It's, what, 10 minutes walk from Paddington? Can't be a lot more.
Would it be near Sussex Gardens, do you suppose? Is that the reasonable?
Yes.
See, when I went to London for the first time in the 60s, following the instructions in London on $5 a day, we stayed on Sussex Gardens, and if the hotel had these passageways that Paul describes, in which you move from building to building on ramps or on short staircases.
As I was saying to June before we started, I think I know where it may have been, but listening to June has made me doubt my attributes. So I want to revisit that. But yeah, it's eminently somewhere in that area. Yeah, and I don't think we will ever actually determine where. I don't know what June thinks about.
Paul, as you probably know, Paul is very, very sketchy with details, especially with the Bellevue. That's a southern coastal town. And it's the same with his characters. He never likes putting them to the real people as much as possible. So absolutely no idea. Just that it's west of Queen's Road, we can only guess it could well be Princess Square area.
Yeah,
somewhere around about that kind of wealthy area.
Thanks so much.
And remember that Queen's Road is now called Queen's Way, and it's where the great department store Whiteley's was. I think it isn't anymore.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was your old-fashioned Harrods, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rachel.
Thank you, Keith. June, that was just absolutely sensational.
Oh, thank you.
It really was. I'm worried that I might take this in too academic a direction, but as you know, I am a literature scholar. And I just would love you to say a little bit about the Ufford in relation to the Bellevue, because the Kindly Ones is it is the liminal novel, and it 2 time zones. You've got Giles getting caught up at the sea. He's absent, but he's present.
Yep.
And I just wondered if it's also that moment when the baton of transience is passed over to Bob Duport. I'd love you to say a bit about that.
That last bit is exactly what I've been writing about in my thesis chapter, and that Bob Duport seems to be the second Uncle Giles. It's so interesting. I've in my thesis, I've linked the Bellevue to the spiritual side of the Ufford, because you've got Myra Ardsley, and there's almost this kind of uncanny cloning of a hotel that is so similar. There's very little written about the Bellevue itself. It's not unique. It's always in comparison to the Ufford. Just like the Ufford, it was like blah, blah, blah. And as you say, it's very liminal. You know, I think where it sits in the middle novel of the 12. And there's a lot with Uncle Giles there too, going with the Stonehurst. That was the beginning of the First World War. Uncle Giles arrives with the news that it's breaking out. At the advent of the Second World War, Uncle Giles passes away. It's so intricate. Oh, Rachel, I could talk to you for hours on this, honestly, but I'll probably get kicked off the call. But I've linked it to spiritual links within, and a kind of there's a lot of supernatural cloning there. I'll need to send you my thesis when I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Noreen, you're on mute.
Right. As Keith says, I lived in Bayswater for several years, and it has amused me slightly to hear it described as this area of wealth, which I've no doubt it was, but in fact, it was an area of speculative build in the early 19th century. It was entirely, as far as I can make out, all those Queen Anne fronts have Mary Anne backs, I assure you. The view out of my bedroom in the hostel in which I lived, it looked really quite a grand building, but the view out was onto tiled walls and drain pipes. I mean, wow. It was so grand. It had ironwork across raw ironwork across the front. I would say it was 1840. I have actually looked it up. Certainly 1840, if not 1830. But an awful lot of the stuff in Bayswater went up at around the same time. And yes, it was all sort of slightly dodgily financed, some of it. Mm-hmm. It was all trying to be what it wasn't really. It really is trying to, or was trying to be then, the equivalent of somewhere like the more refined areas of Belgravia, for instance. And if you look at the styles of the houses, they very much echo Belgravia, but they're often a cut down version. The proportions aren't quite so good.
Yeah, they're done. They were clearly done on the cheap. Yes. To my and by the time Powell is writing about this, that Bayswater area has become, pretty down at heel.
Cosmopolitan, dear, vibrant. Well, it was.
I know when Noreen and I were quote courting unquote, and I never felt very. It's one of those areas, one of the few areas of London where I never felt very safe.
But
and we're talking about the late 70s now.
I always felt,
which says something about how it had come down in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always felt relatively safe because there was a certain amount of female traffic out on the streets, and people cruising around looking for a casual bit of something, Widmerpool style, would have found plenty of outlets for it. All the police cars went round the corners on 2 wheels because the guys were hanging out the windows looking at the girls. You did not ever go into a pub on your own if you were female.
Yeah. Okay.
And incidentally, I can't remember, I have in my memory, perhaps faultily, that before it was called Queen's Road, and that before, as Keith said before, that was before it was Queen's Way, I have a feeling it was called something unlikely like Black Lion Road or Black Lion Street. But Queen Victoria apparently used to ride down it on her pony when she was a teen. So that's supposed to be why they called it Queen's Road and then Queen's Way.
Okay. Thank you. Merrick.
Oh, hello, everybody. June, thank you for a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it, everything about it, and I would really like to read your thesis when it comes out. I'm actually sitting here about 2.5 minutes walk away from Moscow Road in Bayswater, which is where I think the Ufford was. There's another road just parallel called Dawson Place. And the odd thing is, the first time I read the dance was long before I knew this area, and I kind of had in my mind's eye what the Ufford was like. And then about 15 years ago, I moved here, and suddenly it absolutely matched the description. And you know, one of the great things about Powell is that he describes these things, and somehow it does conjure up the same mental image with all of us, I think. And that picture, when the picture you showed of the Ufford that comes from the album, I think we probably all had that sort of picture in mind before we saw it. And there's a big house just around the corner from here, which is that house. And that's exactly how I imagined the Ufford. And there it is. And the area has improved a bit since Noreen described it. It's become very expensive now because, of course, central London is very expensive. But there are a lot of hotels around there, and they mainly cater for reasonably well-to-do foreign tourists. So there are a lot of people from across the Atlantic around here who are staying in hotels like that because, as Noreen says, they look very smart on the outside, but once you get behind the facade, of course, they're a bit tatty. And what happened was that Mayfair was built up and all the expensive areas. And then when they moved further west out here, they realized there was no market for expensive houses anymore. So they built them on the cheap. So it's got that sort of faded air. Now there's a road just near Waterloo Station, which I used to walk past on my way to work, called Ufford Road. And whenever I saw it, I always thought of this. And I wonder if he knew that road. It's just opposite the Old Vic, just near the Old Vic Theatre.
Oh, around there.
And you know, he must have seen that name somewhere. And I really like your idea that it's coupled to what people could afford. I hadn't thought of that, but I've always thought it's the sound of it and the look of it on the page has this slightly down at heel, depressing sort of Ufford. You just to say it gives that sort of slightly tawdry sort of feeling about it. So I've always been fascinated by the Ufford Hotel and the whole Uncle Giles thing and the Bellevue that you mentioned. But just hearing people sort of talking about this area without knowing it, I just thought I might sort of give that thing. And now the other thing is, it is, you're right, Whiteley's department store, and it used to be one of the most exclusive stores in London. It was like Harrods, and it closed, I don't know, a long time before I came to the area, and it turned into individual shops. And then about 5 years ago, they knocked it down, but they kept the facade. And there's a massive building program going on here where the facade is kept, but they're building a huge building behind it, which is going to be offices, shops, hotels, you name it. It's a huge thing. And the streets around here, I'm surprised you can't hear it. If it was during the day, you would hear it. It's full of big lorries going there. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you so much, June. Really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that, Merrick. And it's interesting, you know, to speculate on where AP got a lot of the names he used. I mean, for places, as some of the places and buildings, as well as people. I don't know whether anybody's actually managed to work out any ideas of where he got the Ufford name from, apart from, yeah, okay, there's a road round by the Old Vic. I haven't picked that one up. So yeah, John Blackster.
I was only just going to say, just when you said that, I mean, Powell used a lot of geographical names of villages and so on, and Ufford is a village in Suffolk.
Suffolk.
Yes.
Yeah. By a weird coincidence, which would appeal, I think, to Harwellians, there is an Ufford country house hotel, which is extremely luxurious. It has its own golf course and so on and so forth. So I think Uncle Giles would be somewhat out of place in the actual Ufford hotel.
Yeah, like it. Yes, I mean, yes. Thank you, John, for that. I do now recall the Ufford village. I have a sneaky feeling there's another one somewhere in the UK. I'll have to look it up. But yeah, yes. I mean, Paul may or may not have known the Suffolk one, or he may just have picked it off a map. Who knows? I mean, he as Merrick says, he may well have known, Ufford Road in Waterloo. I don't know how well he knew Waterloo as such, but
I think Prue
he
wants
was
to ask a question.
he was an inveterate walker, so yeah, he was always walking around London. Prue's waving a hand.
Can you hear me? Can
Yes.
you hear me? All right. No, I've been to Ufford, and it's quite likely that AP went there because it's got a wonderful church with pew ends and a font cover. Quite wonderful. So that's the one in Suffolk.
Oh,
But,
thank you.
What I was
right.
actually going to ask about was, I had to pop out for a minute or two, and I may have missed it, but the fact that Uncle Giles, who is exactly my Uncle Roddy, as you probably know. Anyway, Uncle Roddy used to keep half his belongings in the not the cellar, the basement of the Ufford. And what Uncle Giles didn't keep there, my Uncle Roddy kept in my flat in Battersea, and it was consisted of masses of things which he'd acquired from time to time, and thinking that they were all going to be worth a great deal of money. And of course they never were. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, but I don't think you did mention the basement of the Ufford.
Yeah. Paul.
I was just going to say about the Suffolk first. Of course, AP was good friends with George Orwell. And I often think of Orwell's father when I think of Uncle Giles, who was a man of the sort of colonial service military type, ending up in Southwold in Suffolk, and the idea of potted palms in Benares, dishes and things. I mean, Orwell would have talked about that, because I think it summarized for him the sort of slight seediness of upper middle class people who'd kind of lost their way after colonial service or military services in Uncle Giles's case. So it could have come from that. I just wanted to say, June, you've set a very high bar for all our presentations. I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
Not at all.
And the I mean, the idea of the ship being stranded in the streets of Bayswater, I think, is the one that you reminded us of with the Ufford, with these guests kind of stranded in a milieu which they no longer really feel part of or really belong to. And it's a kind of a refuge for some of them from what's happening. And I hadn't really thought about it before, but when you say that the Ufford and the changes in the Ufford are kind of a symbol really of what's been happening to British society, at least of that type of British society through those years, really rings true. So you've really illuminated
thank you.
that aspect of the novel very much. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Noreen's got her hand up again.
Because he's sitting by my elbow, I've just looked in the ever reliable Bartholomew, and there is an Ufford in Cambridgeshire as well.
Yes, correct.
Oh, wow.
Feeling there was another one.
Yeah.
It's
too good to waste. To me, the name nearly has overtones of Carol, and as in Uffish thought he stood. But I don't know what the origin of the name is at all. Should have to go and look that up.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else, or are we? Have we done? Okay, no. Paul.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Keith. If we're done, then just to say thank you again very much to June for her talk, and we'll be delighted to follow up with you, June, to get that as part of our recorded conference, but also as part of our published conference proceedings. Just to remind everybody that our next talk is on the Wednesday, the 13th of July, which is Dr. Jonathan Black on AP as liaison officer in World War II. And we have one of our worldwide Zoom social chats coming up on Saturday, the 25th of July, actually at 5 o'clock. So so note the time if you want to join that. So it's 6 o'clock for the talk and 5 o'clock for the Saturday talk. And thanks again to Keith for organising all the IT logistics, for June for doing it so slickly through her presentation, and for everybody for joining us again today for what I think has been a highlight of our conference season. So thank you very much, everybody. And see you again soon.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Goodbye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.